In the quiet expanse of Jennings, Louisiana, the air hung heavy with summer heat. The bayou stretched endlessly, its still waters reflecting the tangled canopy above green, gold, and shadow all at once. To outsiders, it was serene. To locals, it was alive, hiding secrets in its slow-moving depths. On May 20th, 2005, that calm was shattered. A fisherman, casting lines from a sagging wooden dock, noticed something tangled in the reeds. At first, he thought it was driftwood, but driftwood didn't have hair. Driftwood didn't wear a pink tank top. Torn at the seams, the smell reached him before his eyes could make sense of the shape. He stepped closer, squinting through the haze of humidity, and saw her face down, half submerged, her skin pale and waterlogged. Long strands of dark hair floated like riverweed. Clinging to the cattails, the current was slow here, almost unwilling to give her up. By the time deputies arrived, word had already spread through the small town. In Jennings, nothing stayed secret for long, except, perhaps, the truth. As they pulled her from the water, a hush fell over the crowd that had gathered along the shore. Even the cicadas seemed to stop. Her name was Loretta Chasen Lewis, 28 years old, mother of 2. Known to some, dismissed by others. Her death would be marked as suspicious, but in Jennings, suspicion was nothing new. What no one realized and what no one could have imagined was that Loretta's body would be only the first the bayou would give back. And just when the shock began to fade, the water stirred again, ready to reveal its next secret. 3 months after Loretta's body was pulled from the bayou, the water turned restless again. It was August now, and the Louisiana summer had boiled the swamps into a thick, choking heat. Locals knew that smell, the sour, heavy stench of death that didn't belong to fish or alligators. This time, it was a canal along Rosedale Road. The truck driver spotted something pale snagged against a clump of cypress roots. Deputies arrived fast, but not faster than the flies. When they pulled her out, she was barely recognizable, skin already peeling under the sun's glare, eyes clouded. The official word was advanced decomposition. But the truth was simpler. She had been in the water too long to tell what had killed her. Her name was Ernestine Daniels Patterson, 30 years old, another life gone quiet. And just like Loretta, Ernestine was known to spend time in the rougher circles of Jennings, places where trust was a rare currency, and debts were settled in shadows. Then came March 2007, and May again, for more women, all found in the murk ditches, canals, stagnant pools where the water barely moved. Some were naked, others still wore scraps of clothing. All showed signs of rapid decay, as if the bayou itself wanted them erased. By the time the 7th and 8th victims were discovered, it was no longer possible to pretend these were accidents or isolated acts of violence. The women shared more than waterlogged graves. They shared connections to each other, friends, acquaintances, rivalries, whispers of shared enemies. And all of them, in some way, were tied to the same fragile thread of survival in Jennings, a thread that someone, somewhere, was cutting one victim at a time. Police called it a series of suspicious deaths. The locals had another name for it, the pattern, because in Jennings, when the bayou took one, it was only a matter of time before it took another. But finding the bodies was only half the nightmare. What came next would show that catching the killer might be impossible in a place where truth itself could vanish. From the very beginning, the investigations felt brittle. The reports were thin pages of vague statements, scattered timelines, and half-completed evidence logs. Some case files contained no photos at all. Others were missing witness statements entirely, as if the pages had been plucked out and carried away by the swamp wind. Deputies claimed they were following leads, but those leads seemed to evaporate overnight. A man seen arguing with one of the victims, never interviewed. A vehicle spotted near to separate dump sites, never traced. It was as if the crimes were being recorded not to be solved, but to be buried. And then there were the witnesses. Jennings was small to hide in, especially when the people asking questions were badges. Several witnesses recanted within days of speaking up. Some swore they'd never said a word at all. Others left town entirely, their houses sitting empty, their mail piling up in rusted boxes. Rumors swirled about corruption inside the sheriff's office. One deputy had been accused of buying drugs from the very same women who would later be found dead. Another was rumored to have had a personal relationship with a victim. Whenever these whispers reached official ears, they were met with the same reply, unsubstantiated. For the families of the dead, it was like shouting into a fog. They begged for progress, for answers, for even the smallest sign that someone cared enough to dig. But the swamp has a way of swallowing noise. In Jennings, injustice didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in, slow and damp, settling into the soil, clinging to the air, just like the Bayou mist. But behind the files, the rumors, and the missing evidence, there were real people, women whose faces and voices deserved more than to be reduced to case numbers. Loretta Chasen Lewis, 28, a mother of two. She was quick to laugh, even when life left her little to smile about. She grew up in Jennings, walking the same streets where she'd eventually meet her end. Friends said she had a stubborn streak, one that could keep her standing tall in the roughest rooms. But stubbornness couldn't save her from the swamp. Ernestine Daniels Patterson, 30. The kind of woman who could carry a secret for years. She loved music, gospel on Sundays, blues on a Friday night. She'd battled her demons, and more than once, they'd left their mark. She vanished into the humid dark, only to resurface as a name on a police list, her story reduced to a line in a report. Whitney Du Bois, 26. She loved bright colors, fuchsia nails, neon hair ties, and she carried herself like she was immune to fear. But her world was fragile. Her mother begged her to leave Jennings, to start fresh somewhere new. Whitney never got the chance. Her body was found in a drainage canal, the water lapping against her like it was trying to claim her one last time. Kristen Gary Lopez, 21. She was the youngest, barely old enough to rent a car. She dreamed of moving to Lafayette, maybe even New Orleans, where the music never stopped. But dreams like hers had no shelter in Jennings. The Bayou took her, too. Nicole Guillory, 26. She was the last to be found August 2009 on a lonely stretch of Interstate 10. By then, the list had grown to 8 women, 8 lives that had intersected in small ways: a borrowed cigarette, a shared drink, an overlapping circle of friends. Each had stumbled through the same underbelly of Jennings, where poverty pressed in on all sides and survival was a day-to-day gamble. They weren't perfect. They were human: mothers, daughters, friends, fighters. But in the eyes of their killer, they were disposable. And in the eyes of the system that failed them, they were forgettable. Their bodies were left to rot in the shadows, but their names, Loretta, Ernestine, Whitney, Kristen, Nicole, still echo in the humid air of Jennings. Because for those who love them, forgetting is not an option, even when justice refuses to follow. As the years passed and the list of names grew, Jennings began to change, and not for the better. The fear that once hid in the swamps started to seep into the streets. By the time the 8th body was pulled from the water, Jennings no longer felt like a town, it felt like a wound that wouldn't close. The streets emptied earlier each night. Porch lights burned until dawn, their weak glow barely pushing back the black curtain of the Louisiana dark. Even the bars, once alive with jukebox blues and low laughter, grew quiet. Conversations ended when a stranger walked in. Rumors spread faster than the truth ever could. Some swore the killer was a drifter, slipping in and out of town with the fog. Others whispered that he wasn't a stranger at all, that he was sitting in church on Sundays, waving to neighbors, shaking hands at the grocery store. The idea that the danger might be someone known, someone trusted, was worse than imagining a monster in the trees. Families of the victims waited, their lives suspended between grief and rage. They organized candlelight vigils by the railroad tracks, leaving flowers and framed photos that wilted and warped in the humid air. But each vigil felt heavier than the last because nothing changed. The killer remained free. And the silence from authorities grew louder than the cicadas. And the swamp seemed to. Now, it had taken the women into its still waters, and now it held something else: answers, evidence, truth deep beneath the green surface where no one dared to look. The people of Jennings learned to live with the fear, the way one learns to live with heat or mosquitoes. It was always there, humming in the background. Some left town altogether. Others stayed, locking their doors and keeping their eyes low. Because in Jennings, danger wasn't just in the shadows. It was in the water. And the water wasn't done. Time moved on, but the questions stayed. The faces of the victims faded from headlines, yet in Jennings, the wound never healed and the killer's shadow never left. Years slid by, one heavy summer into another. The faces of the Jeff Davis 8 faded from the front pages, replaced by new headlines, new tragedies. But in Jennings, their absence was a shadow that never moved. Books were written, true crime authors picking apart the facts, or what few facts there were. They mapped the victims' lives, traced their connections, and shone a light on the suspicious gaps in the official narrative. A documentary followed, bringing cameras into the swamps, interviewing families who had waited too long for justice. It aired on national television. For a few weeks, the murders became a talking point again. And then, silence. No arrests. No new suspects. No official explanation for how 8 women could be murdered in a town of 10,000 people without someone seeing, without someone knowing. Theories piled up like driftwood on the Bayou banks. Some believed the killer was a single predator, careful and patient, weaving in and out of his victims' lives until it was time to strike. Others pointed at corruption, at the idea that the killer wasn't outside the system, but inside it, protected by a wall of uniforms and unspoken loyalties. For the families, the years had carved deep lines in their faces and heavier weights on their hearts. Mothers outlived daughters. Children grew up with only photographs and rumors to remember their mothers by. They still gather sometimes, by the water, where flowers float in silent tribute. The air there is always still, as if the bayou is listening. The Jeff Davis 8 remain where the swamp left them, in graves that hold more questions than answers. In Jennings, their names are whispered, not shouted. They are silent murmurs in a bayou grave, and somewhere, the one who put them there is still breathing the same air. The story of the Jeff Davis 8 is more than a string of unsolved murders. It is a reminder that justice is not guaranteed and that silence can be as dangerous as violence itself. These women were daughters, mothers, friends. Their lives mattered long before their names were tied to tragedy, but in towns like Jennings, where poverty, addiction, and corruption can intertwine, victims are too often dismissed. Their cases left to gather dust. If there's one lesson to take from this, it's that community vigilance matters. Ask questions. Demand transparency. Keep telling their stories. Because forgotten cases stay unsolved, and killers thrive in the shadows we choose not to look into. Justice doesn't only belong in the courtroom, it starts with us, and it starts with remembering. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Keep their names alive. And subscribe for more stories that remind us why some fates should never be forgotten. Thank you.